When I was a kid, I was tormented by nightmares almost every night and scared of practically everything. Vampires, ghosts, zombies, werewolves, clowns, bugs. Well, now hold on. Go back a few? One more? Anyways, I wanted to not be afraid anymore, and in my head, the logical option was to consume so much that I'd build a tolerance. So I started really small. Scary stories to tell in the dark, Goosebumps, and Are You Afraid of the Dark were my first steps into the genre. At the time, these were peeking between my fingers level of scary, and hell, looking back, some of this shit definitely shouldn't have been shown to kids. Eventually though, I did grow to no longer fear Slappy and the Hookman, but my plan didn't work. Instead of desensitizing myself, I started to enjoy getting scared. That rush of adrenaline felt like a drug, so I kept pushing myself to tolerate more scary subject matter each day. But as I got older, my fears became more realistic. I no longer thought about keeping garlic around my neck or staying inside during full moons. Instead, my fears now centered around reality, accidents, natural disasters, dangerous criminals, and diseases. So, to make me stir in my seat, tighten my jaw, or scream, it would take a lot more work than it used to. Lucky for me, horror evolved as my tolerance did, and with that evolution came a rise in quality, specifically in cinema. I believe the horror genre of film is home to some of the most fun and deeply passionate pieces of work, and I'm here to convince you of that. I want you to come away from this with the desire to consume more horror content, and I'm going to provide you with a starter pack to help you dip your toes in. To keep things short and simple, I'm just going to talk about 4 horror movie subgenres, using one of my favorites as an example, and then give you a bunch of other ones I think you should watch. A found footage film is all about portraying its story as reality through the camera. The term found footage comes from the idea of someone either finding raw footage and publishing it, or the characters within the story publishing it themselves. These films are often shot from handheld cameras, with the characters within the story being the ones filming. This firmly grounds the film and allows the viewer to instantly insert themselves inside the story. It's as if we are the camera and we're experiencing the story with the characters. One of my favorite examples is Paranormal Activity. The Paranormal Activity franchise at its core is a constant exponential increase in fear for both the characters and the audience. These movies are all about each scare being bigger than the last one, and while that premise sounds like it could compromise a film, Paranormal Activity never lets that ideology be its downfall. In fact, it's the greatest strength of these films. The way these movies ramp up is captivating. I remember binging these in a tiny dorm room with my roommate, and we were absolutely enthralled by the end, wanting to immediately watch the next one. This is where they get you. They start really slow, and then by the end, it's balls to walls crazy. Then you start the next one, and it's right back to slow. This franchise runs on this anticipatory pacing. In fact, almost all found footage films work off the anticipation of the viewer. Because of this, these movies are often described as boring, and while I agree they could be to a passive viewer, upon rewatch I realized every little detail matters with these films, and that's why the slow pace is so captivating. Little lines that you think are just there to have our characters interact actually serve as setups for later reveals that illuminate a substantial and interesting story. Seemingly throwaway props and plot points are used to give you the aha moment later when you connect the dots. Often with found footage, you run into the issue of trying to rationalize the person actually recording what's happening, but the way they integrate the found footage aspect throughout these movies is genius. Cameras are so genetically a part of the story that it's hard to remember you're watching a movie. Found footage forces you to be a part of the story. There's no breaks or moments to escape from the current situation. You feel every dodge swing of an axe, your heart beats in rhythm as they run. You're there, in it with the characters, forced to root for them, because if they go, you go, and the story will end. Here's some found footage films that I think you'll like. Merriam-Webster defines a slasher as one that slashes, especially a person who mutilates or kills with an edged blade. But to me, there's a lot more to it. Slashers aren't really about scaring the viewer. It's more about tension through perspective. We as the audience are often given troublesome info that the characters in the movie are not, and it creates this beautiful tension that you can't look away from. That's why any shot from the killer's point of view is so powerful, because it forces the viewer to wait in anticipation knowing that he's right behind the corner. A staple of most slasher films is the final girl, which is essentially the badass female character who lives throughout the entire movie and generally has the final confrontation with the killer. On the opposite end, in this almost morbid persuasion, these movies will even give you characters that you want to see die. The asshole character is another staple, and it again adds this unique experience where you do care about some people surviving, but you're excited to watch some get chopped. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, the fourth in the franchise, is without a doubt the best Friday the 13th film, and my favorite representative for the slasher subgenre. This movie has genuinely likable characters, hilarious moments, and some great kills. Its plot is digestible, and even when Jason isn't on screen, it's still captivating. While some slashers from this era have aged like milk, Friday 4 wears its age on its sleeve proudly, and acts as a timepiece for the mid-80s. The way Jason moves throughout this film is like a predator playing with his food. Jason is allowed to be a competent killer, even setting up the bodies of his kills as bait or obstacles. This final chapter, liars, was clearly put in the right creative team's hands. People describe these movies as dumb fun, but half the time the movie isn't trying to be smart. A slasher is at its best when it leans into absurdity and lets the audience have fun. There's a reason there's 6 Scream movies, 8 Nightmare on Elm Street films, 12 Friday the 13th, and 13 Halloween movies. Say what you will about the quality of some of these, and trust me, there's plenty to say, but at the end of the day, these movies pull audiences to theaters almost every time. Okay, here's my recommendations for slashers. Psychological horror doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't care if you're confused, in fact it wants you to be. Because we fear nothing more than the unknown. Its job is to leave you afraid, have you say what the fuck just happened, and not untie that knot in your stomach. These movies often focus on messing with the audience's perception of the story. They simultaneously fuck with your head, and also have deep conversations with the viewer through the subtext. One of my favorite psychological horror movies is Midsommar. Midsommar at its core is a story about trauma. And boy, is this movie traumatic. I think that's why it works though. My professor would say, it elicits that in which it discusses. But in layman's terms, it's a story about trauma that leaves the viewer traumatized. Evoking that emotion, no, more than an emotion, that permanent scar, requires true art. Midsommar is a really tough watch. I mean, it covers abuse, self-harm, depression, anxiety, drugs, and those are just the ones that come to mind. It's extremely graphic and doesn't shy away from the true brutality of our world. So if you haven't seen it, you may be thinking, why the hell would anyone want to watch this? I think it's the same reason people slow down to look at a car crash. We want to see how bad it can be. Deep down, violence and carnage are captivating. That sounds messed up, and maybe it is, but I think it can serve a purpose. It can be a warning, a screaming message of what can happen, of how messed up the world can get. Psychological horror is definitely a harder pill to swallow than most other horror subgenres. But it's because it's going to elicit a deeper emotional response. It's not going to dance around conversations or brutalities. It's going to shove them in your face and say, here, process this emotional trauma. Or, hey, you know how our society has flaws? Let me show you them dialed up to 11. Sometimes though, they're just fucking weird movies. Here's some psychological horror movies that I like. Supernatural horror works because it preys upon the fear that there are forces at work we can't see, and that maybe death isn't a peaceful ending. See, anyone can say, oh, I don't believe in those sorts of things, but deep down everyone, no matter their constitution, has a tinge of doubt hiding in the back of their skull. The idea that maybe there is something out there, whether demon, ghost, or something else entirely, hiding in the darkness, lurking, manipulating, hungering for our soul, waiting for a moment of true weakness to take us. Films in this subgenre often use this spiritual discussion as the backbone of their story, my favorite example being Longlegs. This movie gripped me firmly by my lower extremities and said, sit down, shut up, and prepare to feel sickeningly uncomfortable for an hour and 40 minutes. My eyes were physically taped to the screen. This movie is dripping with sauce. Less is more, a motto often forgotten in horror, is applied heavily here. Longlegs doesn't berate you with jump scares, it doesn't belittle your attention span with quick cuts. No. It makes you sit in this world with a miserable detective just trying to solve an impossible case. See, the supernatural nature of this film isn't up in your face like it is in films like Insidious. It's in the shadows, following Lee's every waking moment, and guiding every cruelty enacted by Longlegs. That being said, it definitely still evokes that same dread of an unknown force that seems almost unstoppable. Also, this movie just looks plain gorgeous. But in this unique way where it's so dreary but realistic to ours that it has this rawness. Look at this shot. Seriously, look at it. It's empty, it's void of objects and distractions. It's a library, but it feels cold despite the warm lighting. It's quiet, you can't help but wish for more noise. The fog is encasing you in the scene, not letting you escape from the eerie. So you can't help but look into the fog, because the movie forces you to. And what do you see? An image so brief that you could think your mind is playing tricks on you. And now you wonder if likely you too are paranoid. Longlegs personifies the fear of the supernatural like no other, and shows that you don't need the presence to be that present to elicit the fear of it. That letting it hide in the darkness can work because that's where it resides, as an ominous force of nature rather than an antagonist. Alright, here's some supernatural horror movies that I think are worth watching. Here's some other ones that fall into subgenres I didn't discuss. Often, I look back at this moment when I was in 2nd grade, and I pulled scary stories to tell in the dark off that library bookshelf. And I wish I could go back in time and tell that kid the truth. That you'll never not be scared of something, no matter how many stories you read or movies you watch. Living is terrifying, but it's the fact that you can feel scared that makes life so beautiful, because you're scared only because you're so alive. So enjoy that fear, cherish those goosebumps, and for God's sake, don't watch the Goosebumps movie. I'm trying to keep these persuade the audience videos more bite-sized for accessibility's sake, but obviously there's more great horror content out there. I've recently binged 3 of Mike Flanagan's TV shows and read the phenomenal Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. So feel free to comment your favorite piece of horror content, or just maybe one that you don't think gets enough love. I really appreciate those of you who stuck around to the end. This one was a challenge for me. Walking the line of showing just how good horror movies can be without spoiling the same movies I'm asking you to watch was not easy. I honestly just need to get these thoughts out of my head to make space for other things. I've been changing the script for almost 4 months now, so hopefully you at least want to try watching a horror movie.